why would I quit financial services A to work for financial services company B when it's the same shit?
Hi, I'm Andy.
And I'm Roger.
And welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics
on our search to find the middle.
That's fatphobic.
I don't feel war. I just own halfway to Siwa.
A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
I act as if God exists.
Put your masks on.
How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words.
Hey, Roger.
Hey, Andy. How you doing?
Yeah, good. I think we're going to do a bit of housekeeping.
Housekeeping?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Weight keeping, maybe.
Oh, yes.
We forgot last week.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, you brought it up. You go first.
Well, I actually don't know what my number now is because I don't have access to my scales. But when I did measure last week, it was a 1 kilo loss for the week. So I'll have to check in.
So what is that net?
All up? Well, since we've been tracking, 3.5 kilos all up, based on since tracking. But I think I lost a few kilos before I started tracking.
All right. Well, I didn't have such a great week last week. I went out a bit. Had a few. Pretty much it fell apart. The wheels came off on the weekend, which is not uncommon, and I pretty much put most of the weight back on. Unfortunately,
well, that's just water. But that's just your water. Like
it might be. It might be, right. It might be. But all I can tell you is that I'm back to exactly where I started, as far as the numbers go.
Not to get crude, but like, has it ever entered your mind like, I just took a dump, like I'm going to be like 200 grams lighter now?
200 grams. I think I can do better than that.
Well, I don't know. It depends on the water content.
When you're talking about these fine numbers and the new digital scales, yeah, I think all that stuff counts, right? Like definitely, I mean, like taking a piss in the morning kind of thing. And I know for a fact, like, so I usually measure before I go to sleep and in the morning. And so I kind of know, it's really interesting because I think that the amount of weight that I lose from sleeping doesn't seem to equate to the volume of piss that I do out in the morning. I think there's something else going on, like some kind of weird spiritual fat burning while I sleep. But
no, I think it's still apparently you breathing out when you're sleeping. A lot of moisture comes out of your body just through breath. That's what I understand it to be.
Really?
Yeah. So you can. I think,
weird.
And it's not uncommon to like for your body weight to fluctuate in the order of the best part of a kilo.
It definitely does for me, right? So I will regularly be probably about 0.5 to 1 kilo lighter from when I measure last thing before I go to sleep and then in the morning after a piss.
I think we have a couple of other little things to touch on before we get into today's episode, but I did just want to mention today I saw the news that Mushroom Lady's been arrested.
She's been arrested but not charged. It was the last headline I had. How does that work?
Well, without knowing anything about the case against her, if there even is one, it could be one of those things where they're like, because she does not come across as the sharpest tool in the shed, right? So it could be one of those.
That'd be a rough interview, I think, if she was applying.
I mean, it could be one of those things where they arrest her, and you know how like cops sometimes like try and give the impression that they've got all this evidence to like elicit a confession. It could be like one of those situations where they're applying a bit of pressure to make her say something. But like, come on, like that's so shady, this whole mushroom case. So for anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, this is the case down in Victoria where three out of this group that ate lunch were poisoned with death cap mushrooms and died, right, from a beef Wellington that was laced with death cap mushrooms cooked by this woman who's been arrested today. And it's been a couple of months since the meal, the infamous meal, but yeah, she was just been out doing her thing for the last couple of months, and now they've arrested her. Anyway, I just wanted to
Wellington's quite a technical dish as well. I mean, Gordon Ramsay would be proud. You know how he has like a meme of reacting to different people making his beef Wellington recipe. Yeah, it's definitely a Netflix drama in that, if not now, in the next 18 months, for sure. I wanted to actually raise something that happened to me today. I think I had my first experience today of accidentally misgendering someone and dealing with those consequences. And of all places that I had it, it was the barista at my local Starbucks, if you can, call that person a barista. I don't know what the right term would be, maybe like jug pourer.
Button pusher.
button pusher or jug pourer. They seem to like have just a lot of jugs that they mix together. Anyway, so I kind of got to the counter and how do I describe the situation? Maybe I don't want to get myself in trouble, but picture a giant Nordic blonde guy, right? Like massive, a strongman looking guy with just like huge, very, very masculine. But imagine that with like a luscious ponytail. So that's what I was dealing with. But to be honest, I just kind of said the word mate, and she kind of pulled me up on it. And she said, I'm a woman. And I said, oh, apologies, I didn't mean to offend you, but I'll have a cold brew venti, please. But it got me thinking, like, I actually use the word mate in a generic term. I'm Australian, and it's just like a filler word for me. It's just like a term of making things casual when I talk to people, right? Like, you use mate when someone is your mate. You use mate when someone's pissing you off. You're like, it's just one of those filler words for me. And I didn't actually have a gender assigned to it.
I think you might have the wrong end of the stick. I just think she's in the habit. She says to everyone who orders their coffee, she says, I'm a woman. Just to avoid confusion.
But I would say that, so she said that to me, right? Like, I'm a woman. And I said, apologies, I didn't mean to offend. And she didn't say, oh, no, that's okay. I'm just telling you, she just didn't say anything else. She just wrote the name on the cup.
I do think terms like mate, that's like same with guys, and they have these like male associations, but technically speaking, they're not gendered terms.
Well, the crossover is, that's a really good example, because in the workplace, it's very common to say, hey guys, let's get together, let's do this. And the term guys refers to the team. But I've noticed of late, in the last couple of years, people have taken offense to that word. They're like, this is language that needs to go. This is like vestigial. This is kind of a throwback to more misogynistic times. You shouldn't be using the word guys.
But see, I think it's my experience has been the other way around, where guys maybe historically was used like a guy, and like these aren't real words anyway. Like these are just slang, kind of culturally defined concepts. But now, like in the workplace, they've become more inclusive. Like, so guys is not. And I hear women call each other guys, like, so I think there's a bit of evolution, and that's appropriate. Like, but yeah, I mean,
you've painted it in quite a good way for a comeback, but definitely it's been the opposite for me. It's like guys, it's like calling someone a female post worker a postman. It's like, it's not appropriate anymore. It needs to be much more gender neutral.
Just as we're talking about changing workplace culture, I heard this didn't happen to me personally, but I did hear this story a week or so ago about how someone's computer like crashed. Right, they had a problem with their computer, and they called like the workplace IT support desk or whatever.
Yeah, and
that person, like someone from the IT help desk, had to come to their workstation and try and do something with their computer, right? Mm-hmm. But before doing that, the IT worker said, before we begin, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're working today.
Traditional owners of the laptop or the land? This is a Chinese laptop.
Lenovo, Shenzhen.
Originated in
Guangdong province.
The cobalt originated from the mines of
South Africa. Yeah. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting. So,
that's truly ridiculous.
Well, it's just like, I have signaled my virtue by bringing in acknowledgement of countries into meetings, into public ceremonies, public I'm going to print it on the stationery. I'm going to, but I'm going to one up you. I'm going to one up you by, for every exchange that we have, I'm going to do it like, and
there's got to be ironic, right? Because you know what, like in the hierarchy of IT workers, the on-site support desk people are the most hardcore, right? Like they are the people that would be, you know, proper hardware nerds that would go back home and be on the 4chan forums, like spouting all sorts of shit and ironic stuff that's really offensive. So I think that must be ironic because they're the true IT warriors, the kind of hardware monkeys.
But to your to your point around misgendering someone, it wasn't it that there was this whole meme like among young people like 5-10 years ago where they would have the gender like option in a form. They would put Apache attack helicopter as they like, it was just this thing like, you know, like when the census comes around everyone says they're a Jedi.
Yeah. It's creeping up apparently. It's the fastest growing religion in Australia.
More Jedis than Christians.
Makes a lot of sense, actually. Now, we should probably have a little chat about our episode last week. You know, thinking about our episode with Ruben coming on, obviously someone of the Jewish heritage, talking about the conflict and also, you know, learning a little bit about Jewish culture, which I think is wrapped in a bit of mystery for me, just due to kind of proximity and all sorts of things that are warped from Hollywood and comedy and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, what did you? I have a little bit of feedback from our listeners that I'll kind of sprinkle in here. But do you have any reflections on what it was like to chat to Ruben and open up some of these issues?
Yeah, well, we talked about the conflict towards the end of the episode, and I think we kind of in a nutshell sort of hashed out some of the key kind of considerations. And I think the other thing that happened this week was the past prime ministers of Australia releasing like a joint statement on the conflict, predominantly leaning towards acknowledging the impact on, you know, well, the lives lost and in particular the terrorist actions of Hamas and their culpability, as opposed to attacking Palestinian people or you know, necessarily weighing in that one side's right over the other, but nonetheless it was definitely, I think, geared at putting a stake in the ground to say, no, like we've actually got to look at the facts. We shouldn't just be blinded by the simple heuristics of, oh, that's like David versus Goliath, so we should stick up for the little guy, right? That actually is a little bit more complicated than that. And I think that was interesting. Funnily enough, Paul Keating, well, it's probably not funny, but Paul Keating didn't sign it because he's a bit of a contrarian. I think his comment in response was he's not into groupthink sort of thing. And to be fair, I can kind of understand where he's coming from because it's a little bit, you know, self-indulgent to, you know, to think that your views are so important that you know you're going to put out a public statement and that somehow is relevant. But nonetheless, I think it was probably geared at making clear to both sides of politics, right?
I think it does the opposite, though. The ironic thing is I think it does the opposite. It makes it more about him by not joining in.
I don't think that's a negative consequence from Keating's perspective. I think he quite likes that playing out that character.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
All right, so you mentioned some feedback. Hit me.
Yeah, look. On this theme, I suppose that the feedback that I did get was that it was very biased towards supporting Israel, right? And that it didn't really discuss the and support Palestinian people, right? It was lacking that side of the argument and the kind of humanity of that side, which I actually found quite surprising. Now, I'm not surprised to say that, you know, like when we have a Jewish man on the podcast, that it's not going to have a spirit of supporting Jewish people and their plight. But I would say that looking at how Ruben answered a lot of his questions, I was actually really surprised that he didn't go harder in a lot of areas. I thought that he was actually very sympathetic to the Palestinian cause and the impact of Palestinian people, right? And critical of Israel in many areas as well, much more than I I thought, and those leanings would be. So yeah, I was a bit surprised that was the feedback that came back, but I think it just shows you that once you've picked a frame on this, it's very hard to change.
I would unashamedly take a view that there's no point wallowing in the harsh severity of what happened, right? Both on the 7th of October or the aftermath in terms of the impact on people in Gaza, right? And that might sound really harsh and like, where's your humanity or whatever. But at the end of the day, we've got to look at this. Well, I look at this, right? And not everyone's different, right? But I look at this as like a problem and decompose it and think about solutions. Now, that's not how the community at large will look at this issue, but that's how I will think of it. And for me, it's absolutely a given. So much so it's a given that it like doesn't bear even any further discussion, which is why it's like we've moved on from the point of acknowledging that there are a whole bunch of really innocent victims here. And to be honest, probably orders of magnitude more victims in Gaza, right? Like that's just the nature of the beast. And that in terms of suffering and all of that, like it's a given to acknowledge that, and they're innocent people. But really what we're, in terms of decomposing this problem, we've got to look at, well, who are the actual actors in this, right? And the actors are Israel as a state, as the government, the military and so on, and Hamas. Whether they truly represent Palestinians, or even if it's just that they're the ones in control, they're the actor on the other side. And if you're truly going to solve this problem and you're going to reach an outcome, you have to be able to call a spade a spade. Being able to condemn Hamas does not equate to you dismissing the suffering that Palestinians are enduring. They're not mutually exclusive concepts, right? So for me, that's a given. Like, you can't say to Israel there needs to be a ceasefire while Hamas is basically saying, oh, there are going to be more attacks. Like, we're going to do it again. We're going to keep doing it. And by the way, we don't want our people to leave the areas of Gaza where we're going to shoot more rockets from. And remember, there are people actually living in Israel who have fear for their lives. So I mean, criticize Israel and hold them account for doing making sure they do the right thing and don't commit war crimes and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, I just think you can't criticize Israel unless you're willing to be balanced and say, like, call a spade on Hamas, right?
I think that's why a lot of these interviews start off with trying to establish some shared ground on condemning Hamas and trying to find some bearing on what people think about them, because even that, right at the start of the conversation, that it's hard to find common ground on that. And therein lies the problem of how do you progress without that shared middle ground in a conversation, right? I shared that satire cartoon with you the other week where it has, the Hamas leader on one side and Benjamin Netanyahu, obviously the leader of Israel, on the other, and the Hamas leader's holding out their demand saying death to all Jews. And then they have like Biden in the middle or saying, oh, can't you meet him halfway? Or whoever it was, maybe it's not Biden, but a negotiator saying, can't you at least meet him halfway? And that I thought was a brilliant way of summarizing this idea of like, if peace is what you really want, you're not going to get it with these leaders, right? It is incompatible, right? We are not talking about a two-state solution. We are not talking about, some kind of peace, long-lasting peace. We are talking about a terrorist body, and the demands of them are unyielding in that way. They're very clear. So just the last thing I would say is that I have watched enough true crime podcasts and documentaries on cults to kind of identify one when I see one. And when you see a cult leader telling their followers to enact all these sorts of sacrifice and crimes while they are living it up somewhere else and not living by their means, that's a huge red flag and should be condemned. There needs to be more pressure for Hamas to surrender and alleviate the pain on their people that they're going through, that they have provoked.
At the moment, it's the reaction in the public, discourse is very much about big guy squashing little guy, and that's true. Like there's no two ways about that. But no one's really asking, but like, why is it's a bit like if you have like an adult that does something to restrain a little kid that's like whacking the adult with a stick, you can say that the adult is bad for restraining the child, but like what's the alternative? The adult is just supposed to cop the child whacking them with a stick. Like that's what they've got to they've just got to endure that just because of the nature. And I think that's kind of the situation that we're in and Israel's in, and they're never going to look good restraining the child. But that's what they've got to do. Otherwise, they're going to get whacked. And into problem-solving mode, you can say, yep, what we need is like a little bit of discipline and a bit of restraint.
There are no good analogies in this space, are there? but I understand what you're saying. And I did kind of reflect the other day of just like, you know, we're kind of obsessed at the moment about civilians not being able to move out, right? Like in the refugees. And I think of like how quickly the Ukrainian women and children moved on to different parts of the country and into Poland and other countries like that. And I just kind of like draw that parallel. Like, how would we be feeling differently if they were all still within the country in this active war zone? It just boggles the mind.
All right, let's change gears. On less heavy topics, I read this thing today, and it was saying that when a millennial, so what's like millennials like, they're the old people in the workplace now, aren't they, right? Hang on, I always get confused by this.
We're millennials.
Yeah, but Gen Z, well, what are they?
Yeah. Well, Gen Z are like the 20-somethings, right?
Yeah. So millennials are like the like we to Gen Z are what Gen X was to us, right?
Yeah.
So we're the old people in the office now. Like that's it's coming. It's going to become that way very soon. And Gen X are the new boomers, right? Anyway, sorry, we've clarified that. So this article was saying how if a Gen Z quits their job, they get called a hero, an icon. How good for you. Well done. They get praised for it. Whereas, well, they didn't necessarily name a generation, but the article was saying anyone, you know, over the age of 40 will say, oh, how are you going to pay your rent? Or how are you going to pay the bills? Oh, are you okay? You sure you got everything sorted out? Oh, with this like worried sort of tone. And it did get me thinking, and this is why we sort of exchanged, we would talk about today, that like just the differences in attitude relating to the generations about work, right? Because there is something in that little nugget of an example that I wouldn't argue with that. I would ask that. I would ask that question. Oh, are you okay? What's your plan? Like, that's what I would ask, right?
Yeah.
And I can totally imagine Gen Zers saying all those things too. So it does make sense, and there's something in it. So I thought we might unpack that today.
Yeah, I agree as well. My initial reaction is that the younger you are, the less responsibilities you do have, and life can be, for a lot of us, a little bit like one of those fish traps where the further you get into the trap, the harder it is to go backwards because of the spurs. You know, you have more responsibilities, more costs, you got mortgage, all these kind of things that potentially these young Gen Zs don't have, right? So they feel more free about it. And they're freer in that sense to, you know, follow their desires around how they're feeling and what they want their career to be and how responsive they want it to be to their life, versus, say, someone who's a lot further down the track and has already made concession after concession, and all of a sudden they're living really tight. You know, they can't think about themselves in that way. They're a provider. They have to, you know, they're accountable to a lot of people. So I think that's my initial response, that maybe it's a case of just, they're not old enough to have true responsibility yet. But I know that there's probably other things.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I think one-dimensionally, the whole like, oh my gosh, like how are you going to pay for this bill, right, is going to be a bigger concern if you've got a mortgage and you've got kids and you've got to put food on the table, you know, make ends meet for a household, as opposed to, it's all right, well, I'll just, if I have to, I'll get a job waiting tables or something, or I'll go and live with my parents for a couple of months. You know, that's a different proposition, right? And so I think that's the one-dimensional aspect of it. So like a lot of these Gen Zers can say it now because they don't have kids and they don't have mortgages and all that sort of stuff, but they will probably change when they do, right? Because that's like called, you know, life and having responsibility. But I think it's deeper than that, because I think, and maybe like, you know, I don't want to be reflecting only on my sample of friends that like I know growing up and all that, and then assume everyone's like that. But I do think probably for our generation and maybe the generations before us, there was still a strong sense of like career and having like quite a heavy, strong focus on career and, you know, getting a good job and progressing up the ladder and getting more responsibility and making something of being proud of your career that I don't think is valued as much now. And so I guess the two-dimensional aspect of this question isn't just that. Maybe the concern for me when if I were to say, oh, well, what about how would you pay your bills? It's that being the first reaction. It's not just implicit in literally paycheck to paycheck, but it's also, but what about this as an impact on your career and longer term? And I do think there's a difference between the generations in that I do think younger generations are sort of more oriented around, well, this is the trope, right? This is the stereotype.
Yeah.
That they don't care as much, right?
What you're painting, I think they would see as a very narrow pathway in corporate Australia or corporate life, where you join a big corporation that has a big teat that you can get on the end of, and you can work your way up for a meaningful amount of your career inside that organization. And I think that strategy has essentially built a lot of the middle class in Australia, working for a big bank or in financial services, all these other areas, and being safe and rewarded in that way. But I don't think they buy into that. And, you know, to a degree, our generation doesn't quite buy into it. We're probably on the cusp of it because we've seen how these companies treat people and have treated our parents, for example, and stuff like that. So I think it's that they don't have any faith in that as being a sustainable career path anyway. So they don't have this kind of social contract with the corporation that they're working with. And actually don't think that they should. I probably prescribe to that a little bit more too, that people often get into this feeling of like, oh, you know, my company, Westpac, is they're my family and they'll look after me and they'll do the right thing and stuff. But you know, I've worked in so many areas around org design, all these kind of things, that they're not your family. They're a business, and you are a part of that business.
Can I just pull you up on something though? Of anyone that I know, you've worked the longest at the same organization for longer than the same corporation, for longer than anyone that I know, right?
Yeah, and I can.
So
explain that.
You must
No.
implicit. You might think you don't, but you must
No, it's the exact opposite, Andy.
Well,
it's literally the exact.
You would have left and become a barista now by
No. No. So it's the exact opposite for me, right? Like, so people tend to move around every 18 months to 3 years, right? There's a type of person. It's like, you know, some people are long-term relationship people and some people are not. I feel like it's the same way with careers, right? But what you'll find is that they move from same job to same job, and look, that makes sense, but they'll just be doing the same shit with a different business. Now, the reason for me that I've stayed where I've stayed is that while I've had variety within my company, I've done a range of different things, like really different things. To me, like, the alternative is just doing the same thing at another company, right? And I never really wanted to just kind of chase that around of like, it's not the difference of quitting your job and becoming a barista or changing. I mean, that might be the dream, but you, like I said, you slowly get locked into responsibility. For me, it's like, why would I quit, you know, at financial services A to work for financial services company B when it's the same shit, right? Like, I never felt that draw. So I ended up staying.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, you pitched the notion of like loyalty. Like, I don't think it's about necessarily our generation or older generations being loyal to companies. I think that went out certainly with the boomers even, right? That idea that you work for one company and you're loyal to that company and you work with them for life. Like, that's been gone for a long time. But I still think like Gen Xers, our generation, there is this thing about not so much loyalty to a company, but loyalty to your career, right? And wanting to get ahead and like being scrappy about it even, and saying, oh, well, I'm going to make this lateral move because it's a good opportunity. I'm going to get paid, you know, 20% more. And yeah, then I'll work there for a few years and then get the next job. Yeah, well, I'll get paid another 20% more, that sort of thing, right? I don't think we see that now. I think we see, I mean, I'm sure there's some people like that, but I think there's a much stronger emphasis. I mean, all of the stuff around, you know, the 4-day week, right? they love that shit, like the Gen Zs, right? That's like right up their alley, right? It's like, you know what? I don't want a job if you're going to make me come into the office. I don't want to work for you. Like, it's like, it's on their terms, right? It's not on the company terms. It's on their terms. And that's not like, our generation would fold at like, oh, yes, I'll do whatever you say. Like, because like, if this opportunity is the next step rung on the ladder, like, we'll do whatever. Like, bend me over and slap me silly, right?
I kind of disagree, man. Like, I think that our generation actually does care about lifestyle and does like this whole kind of work-life balance bullshit. Our generation does actually believe in that,
but not as much as them, not as much as Gen Zers.
No, I think
like we might be the step along the trajectory towards that. But there's no way. Like, I could not believe for a second if you was to say to me that Gen Y, we're just the same. Like, that we're Gen Y and Gen X.
Not the same, but I'm saying we prioritize work-life balance in a way that, like that is more severe on that continuum than, say, Gen X is.
Okay, all right. Well, let me be more clear then. We prioritize work-life balance. They prioritize life. And without work, right? And like, that's brutal. And look, sorry, apologies to all my younger, I don't even know if we've got any younger listeners, but that's not fair. Like, the reality is there's a lot of, grumpy old men. We did that episode 20 episodes ago. There is like, the reality is like, there's a lot of hardworking young people who are very ambitious and exactly the caricature that I've spelt out for our generation and others, right? But
we can't have it both ways though, right, Andy? Like, we can't criticize the younger generation for being more ambitious without any kind of merit, but then also say that they don't care about their careers.
Okay, so I guess the first thing is this a phenomenon, right? And like, I think it is a phenomenon, right? I think this is absolutely the case where you have this reckoning among younger people around things like, old people don't get what it's like to care about your life and to care less about work, right? This is like, and you see it like on social media, like this whole paradigm of like old people that like, aren't they so stupid? They're so obsessed with their jobs, right? That's a thing, right? That's a meme like on the internet, right? So it must be true. And it is something that generation owns. And maybe that's just like that period in your 20s when, like we were talking about before, where there's no responsibilities and that will change. But I do think that's kind of partly a thing. But look, I think it's a thing, right? I don't have any stats, any numbers. I don't even know how you would even prove it as a concept, right? But I do think that the difference is that, well, when we were of that age, there was a status game being played that related to your work and related to your career. So people did care if you had a good job. It did feed into your status, right? I don't think that's as strong now. And I think that the things that earn you status among younger people aren't necessarily career-oriented. So there could be things like, or how many social media followers you have. Are you like, or there's all these alternate, maybe the better way to frame it is there's all these alternate ways to accrue the status that we would have accrued from our careers. They can accrue through other channels, right? And I think that's the thing that's different. And so, and that's one proposition. But, and maybe we can talk about this, but I'll put it on the table and then get your reaction to it, is how devastatingly pessimistic young people are around the prospect of being able to buy a home and purchase a property.
Yeah, look, I agree, right? Like, I'm not saying that what you've described as the stereotype around Gen Z is not what I've experienced, because it is. Let me be clear, it is. The rationalist in me does kind of put a lot of eggs in the basket of they're just young, and what comes with being young is like you don't have the responsibility. But I do. It's hard to say. Like, so if you can't have something, do you just turn that part off of you and say that you don't want it? Is that what's actually happening, or is it something more genuine than that? And that's because the way that you've characterized it is kind of, right there. That I think that it is ridiculous how much of your resources go into just putting a roof over your head. Like, it's insane. It's the root of all issues, really, in Australia. This incredibly high cost of housing in our capital cities. So if you opt out of that, I have the voice of like Jerome still ringing in my ears from our gay episode where he was like, we just don't have to worry about the white picket fence. And I have that kind of ringing in my ears every now and then, because it's like, if you are free from that, imagine the possibilities. All of a sudden, your income becomes disposable, right? And part of me thinks that, are we the ones looking at them with pity, or actually they the ones that are free and looking at us with pity? So I do think that it's linked to this whole idea of the white picket fence and owning your own property. Like, is this actually what they aspire to, or have they done the calculus and they've opted out and they would have opted out, kind of thing. But yeah, I think that's definitely a part of it. But I would throw my hat into this idea of not being able to commit to something. So it's more about like your attitude towards commitment rather than any kind of like one thing that is the hallmark of younger generations, that you have so many options, you have so much, you're brought up in this environment of hyper uncertainty and threat and anxiety that it just doesn't make any sense for you to do anything long term. I don't know. That to me maybe is also hand in hand with the housing market.
I think the whole, like, I think status is a good way of decomposing this thing, right? So our generation, Gen X, boomers, like status was career plus where in Sydney or whatever city you're from, like which ring of suburb are you in? Are you in the top tier suburb, second tier, third tier, whatever? And that's your status, right? If you're in a good neighborhood, you've made it. If you're not, try harder next time. And same with your career and all that sort of stuff. So it's all connected. But now, like, you have this situation where you have high status young people in that they've gone to university, they've done well. In their minds, they're intellectually, they've topped that game, if you like, but they're not going to get jobs to afford, the suburbs, right? It doesn't matter. Like, you can't, unless you've got a gift from mum and daddy, you're not going to afford any of those suburbs on an income. So I think with status, they're deliberately opting into a different status game because they can't play that one, and they want to be top status. We all want to it's like in the schoolyard, right? If you're an athlete and you're really good on the sports field, you feel good about yourself, so you don't care about your school marks. Equally, if you're not an athlete and you don't do well, and you're just a bit uncoordinated, maybe you'll take a little bit to schoolwork and try and earn your status that way. And I think that's what we're seeing with younger people.
It might be. Maybe, like I said, maybe I'm in denial about how I've chased things for this idea of like status and where to live and what it would mean, right? And I think maybe the thing that is still unwavering is an attitude towards money. So, this is the whole Andrew Tate thing, escaping the matrix. Like, you can actually work, you can actually earn more money than a traditional 9-to-5 job career by doing a bunch of stuff that is unorthodox, whether it be, online, crypto, all these other kind of things that hustles, right? These side hustles. And I think that culture has definitely come in as well, where it's actually like, you don't have to be the face of some soulless corporate job to earn your money anymore. You're in the gig economy. You can take control of that in a different way. You don't need to rely on, put your hand out and say, and like you said, bend over and take it up the arse just to be supported by a big organization that can give you a salary. So I think it's like a different attitude towards how, the job market is going as well. But yeah, I do think that people are motivated still by money. I don't know if the generation below us are doing systematically making choices to make themselves poorer. Put it that way. They're just finding another way to earn the money.
Well, I'll tell you what I think. I don't think they're trying to make themselves poorer. I don't know that anyone would, but I don't think they care as much about making more money, put it that way. And I know that there are some like entrepreneurs who will be, founders of startups who will dream big and all of that. And most of them will fail and, they'll end up doing other things. But I'm talking about the people who promote the trend of quiet quitting, who just say, I'm just going to do the minimum I have to do, who are quite happy just to get their, maybe not minimum wage paycheck, maybe average wage paycheck, but average is fine. Like average is fine for them. Let's say if you give a quotient, a score of like, how satisfied with average would the generations be? I don't think our generation would be as satisfied with average as the younger generation. And I think that, frankly, that comes because, like, I think the quiet quitting phenomenon has also happened to, I'm not going to be able to buy a house. So, I'm just going to earn my money, and all the consequences are going to come, like, in terms of retirement and not being able to have enough money to fund your retirement. Like, that's down the track, right? Maybe my rich parents will die and I'll inherit a whole bunch of cash and that'll save me, right? That's
probably not wrong.
That's I think it's just like that last, and to be honest, I think we were the last generation where it was possible for someone earning an income without a gift from the parents to have a realistic shot at entering the housing market. I think ours was the last generation. I don't think, and that slipped away in our generation, and I don't think that's possible anymore. And that's really unfortunate and demoralizing and unfair, to be perfectly frank.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've got a lot of rage for the housing situation in Australia, and and my situation's tricky as well. Look, I would say that I still stand by it comes back to a commitment issue, that the quitting kind of thing or the job bouncing that you see it's like this kind of approach to commitment. They don't want to see themselves through bumpy times of the job. They'd rather just take their dignity with them and leave and start again, right? And they have become used to that idea of starting again. So they feel like they pride mobility, which I can get, right? And I'll kind of share my own experiences in that in a second. But I would say too, this idea, like, we've talked about careers a lot in a general sense, but it's, a lot of people quote this line that very, very, very few people have careers. Most of us just have jobs. And I think that is a sentiment that I kind of agree with. Like, a lot of people work to live, not live to work situation, and I'm kind of hitting all these like trashy slogans, but it's true. Like, people live for the weekend, and because their job is just providing a good income for them to fund the rest of their, get their kicks out of work. These weekend warriors, all these kind of things, right? Like, very, very few of us get to have this like true satisfaction and fulfillment that comes from a successful career. Even when you're successful, like even when you're earning really good money, you still may not have a fulfilling career or like a job, and I've seen that. I've like witnessed that like before my eyes many, many times at both the company that I'm in and the small businesses that they interact with. It's not that simple. Like, work is work, and there is something in there that maybe I do agree that it's about the house affordability, and maybe they're in denial about how much they've rationalized that around switching off and saying that's not something they want because they can't get it. It's a pretty good way of protecting one's ambitions and failings. Yeah, there is something envious about that, and like this realization that not all of us get to have this career, and you're sold it so much growing up that like that's what's going to make you happy. And I think that's not a percentage play for most people. That's like a capitalism thing. It's like, of course, we want people growing up to think that the career is the most important thing, or rather than like family and other pursuits and community. It's like, I think that suits the model that we live in.
I certainly agree that the most meaningful things in life are not the paychecks and all the things you can buy with the paychecks. But at the same time, I think often where this whole paradigm goes wrong is you say, oh, well, 4-day week, that would be great. Why shouldn't we have a 4-day week? We need more work-life balance,
Work for the French.
And there might be a suggestion that, okay, you can have a 4-day week, but you're going to get paid 20% less.
Whoa.
well, we can get to that. And then it's like, the 20% less. Yeah, but no, I want my cake and eat it too, right? And so when you have this sort of notion of like, I want to have a less work focused life, right? But yeah, I still want everything. And like, I'm envious of like the boomers that have everything. Yeah, but the boomers bloody worked for it, right? And housing. Let's just put housing to one side. But boomers did it tough too. Like, let's be fair. And I think just final thing on that is like in terms of the job market, right? Like, I don't think really any generation in the workforce, apart from probably Gen X, have really experienced proper, genuine difficulty finding work, right? Because, I mean, we've had sort of unemployment rates of, in the order of 6, maybe edging 7%. But that, unemployment's been as high as double digit, 10%, for example, in the early 90s. So, and that's when you really do value a job. And if you've got a job, you feel very fortunate, especially if it's a good one. So, whereas I think now, unemployment's been below 5% for years now. So it's a lot easier in that churn. But just before we park the 4-day week, I'm just maybe as a sidebar, what's your view on the 4-day week?
Yeah. Look, I think, well, first of all, how do you define the 4-day week? Because I've heard a few different things.
There's a few different models. Well, the most naive model and where I scratch my head is the one where you will just work 4 days instead of 5, but nothing else changes. You get paid the same. And so I figure, well, hang on, how does that add up? Like, so you mean to say you're going to, like, it's not even that you work condensed hours or something, as in you work 40 hours a week in 4 days instead of 5, but that, no, you work less hours, but you get paid the same. And I say, hang on. So that's the one version I've heard. And I think that's the version that people are talking about. Like when they promote, I don't think people are saying, oh, 4 days, but I'll take the pay cut. I don't think that's what they're saying. They're saying, I'll do 4 days, but you got to pay me the same.
It's like this disarmament kind of mentality. It's like, what if just everyone stopped going to the gym and wearing makeup? Like, we'd all be okay because everyone comes down together. Or everyone just, we finish school a year or two earlier, and that's just going to be the new standard, and everyone will just kind of settle down. Look, I think that there are the spirit of it, and there being this idea of like more time to spend and stimulate the economy, more like a greater percentage of your week.
So it's going to help economic growth if we work less.
Help a portion of industry, I think it would help hospitality, and some retail. And I do think that this kind of corporate leash that gets
but how are we going to pay for it?
Corporate leash that sits on an inflated salary without a lot of strain, and a lot of it just goes into paying off mortgages quickly and all this kind of stuff. Like, part of me does wonder whether that the kind of people that will do the 4-day week are those kind of people, and they will end up spending more money or injecting a little bit more of their money into the economy. Part of me could make a little bit of space for that argument. But of course, look, let's be honest, right? Like, you cannot have a model where you work 20% less and expect to be remunerated at the same rate that we are now. Maybe if you did some weird trick where you did now and you froze things for inflation, but of course that's not going to work, right? And of course that you're sitting duck for any other disruption that comes along of people who are willing to outstrip you. I think this is the thing that most people don't understand who are kind of like in salaried jobs, that when you see someone who has made it or is successful, there is no real shortcut en masse of getting there. They are fucking working. They are working 100-hour weeks to get their businesses off the ground, to get to those executive levels. And you shouldn't be envious of them because you're not willing to do that. Right? You are not willing to do that. So I think that you can't, like you said, you can't have your cake and eat it too. But I am willing to give a sliver of like argument to some of the things that I mentioned, that actually there is a proportion of, society that actually there might be a little bit of win-win in there.
Well, I think there might be a little bit of magic pudding in your suggestion that it'll inject more money into the economy because people have more time, just in the sense that, so people, are going to have less money. And
think of all the pickleball leagues that would start up. That's a cash windfall. but don't you think that it's right that the 4-day week is only going to be for this cushy corporate class?
Oh, well, of course, a lot of jobs require face-to-face. I mean, like this is the whole cynicism of the whole working from home thing, where you've got, you know, a class of quite privileged corporate office workers who, you know, kind of cry sort of how unfair the office is, you know, having to go to the office. So, you know, not a dig at you, because I know we've had our discussions on it. But yeah, like the reality is, like so many jobs, like you there's no choice about whether you work from home or not. It's like the job is at this place because you need to interact with people, or you need to actually do things in that location. You know, so I think it's the same with it would be the same with the 4-day week. It's like, well, no, we need this factory to work like, you know, 7 days, preferably, let alone 4 days. And, you know, we need people here, and, you know, schools, what, like teachers going to work 4 days? Like, how's that going to work? Are we going to have 4-day school weeks too? What about police, you know, firefighters, you know, like, we're just not going to put any fires on the 4th day. We're just on the 5th day of the week. We're not going to have that. Anyway, this whole thing is like, I think some of what the things you've said, you know, valuing a little bit more work-life balance. Like, I can totally see the merits in saying, I will work 1 day less. I will work 4 days a week. I have enough my material needs satisfied. I only need the income that I would earn if I worked 4 days a week. And remember, for most people, if you reduced your work hours by 20%, instead of going down by 20%, it might only go down by whatever your marginal tax rate is. So, you know, you might do relatively okay out of it. So I can see like a model where people make those sorts of trade-offs. And I think, just as one other element that this would be a can of worms if we got into it, but like with like AI, like we've got all of these new technologies which have come thick and fast over even just the last 12 months, let alone, you know, what's to come, that I do think we're now, I mean, I know it's like this old, I mean, John Maynard Keynes said that, you know, we'll only work a 15-hour week by, you know, something like that, you know, and that never happened, right? That never came to fruition. But I think we're now at the stage where we could theoretically use less people power, right? Including our brains that are in offices doing things. So I think it's possible, but yeah, I wouldn't have any misconceptions about that. We won't have to take a pay cut.
I'll bring on the UBI. So do you think, like, you know, we're talking about status before, and a lot about status is about attracting a partner or whatever it is on both sides, especially when you're young. Do you think that attitude has changed as well?
Well, I wouldn't know. Isn't it all? It's all Tinder now, isn't it? I don't know. No. Well,
but do you know what I mean? Like for me, like the skeptic in me has to accept that, you know, that is what regulates a lot of this behavior as well.
I don't think so. I think status is nothing to do with that. I think we're ingrained to be status seeking, like, and it's recognition from our peers. It's not I want to find a partner kind of thing. I think there's a different dimension a different game you play, like, I want to get like a nice suit, or I want to go to the gym and build up my muscles, or, you know, but I don't think those things earn you status of the kind that I think we're talking about. I think they earn you appeal as a mate. I kind of feel like status is the thing that earns you respect among your peers or people that you respect. So, I do think it's like, it is, you see it all the time, right? Like the moment someone knows that they're not a high status individual in one status game, they immediately, it's like they give up on that game and they find the game where they do okay, right? And it's like, and that can be anything. That could be anything from, I mean, sports one, but it could be, careers another. It could be, I don't buy into capitalism. Even family. Like there are people who make conscious decisions to shun all of that because my family is like my number one thing. And that's something I think we all would like to think of ourselves. But then there's people who really make that like the thing that they're going to do. They're going to be like volunteer at every school event. They're going to go above and beyond. They're going to make that costume.
I've definitely seen that, right? Like, or the withdrawal from competition is like quite an obvious thing sometimes, right? You see it in kind of bachelorhood with men too. I feel I've seen that. I knew a a few people actually that are like that who have totally withdrawn from that prospect because they're unwilling to play the game or feel as if they can't. And it's just a really strange thing to see when you first meet these people, but that's what they've done. Do you think though, Andy, like you mentioned, you can point the finger at the housing market and the prospect of owning your own property, but do you think there's anything else that would be consistent with our upbringing and the way we are that has meant that we are slightly more career focused or willing to seek status within our career lives?
Well, I think we're also the children of boomers, right? I mean, boomers would see us as like how we're having this conversation about Gen Z, right? And anything we could say about them, they would be saying about us, right? And the stories of like, I worked my whole career, I never called in sick, or I took great pride in my dedication to my job. It was like, part of me. Like, and we would look at those things and say, oh, well, yeah, okay, that's good, but like, maybe not so strong, maybe it's okay to like not be 100% of the time, but I think we couldn't shake all, like, I don't think we did like the 180 degree opposed to we don't want to be anything like that. We dialed it down. Yeah, it's like the boomers probably had it the other way around, had it the wrong way around, where they made all these sacrifices when they were young. And then it's like, oh, we're going to travel in our retirement when they've like need hip replacements and can't walk and do all that sort of stuff. And maybe we should be traveling.
I don't know what went wrong. I ate a ham sandwich on white grain bread for 50 years. Why do I have diabetes now?
Yeah. But anyways.
I think what we should do though, Andy, is that we should actually get the most stereotypical Gen Z on the pod with us. And maybe they can enlighten us, right? Because we're kind of shooting in the dark here.
Well, not to completely shit on the last sort of half an hour of our podcast, but I do think what we're reacting to is like the subtle ways that the generations are different, but actually they're more similar than they are different as a whole. It's just there's these little slight differences that we grab onto as like identity enhancing attributes. So young people, these older generations, they're all about their careers. But actually, you know what? There's a lot of young people that are also all about their careers. And there is a lot of people our age who are also, actually not about their careers and about other things.
And that's what I was trying to point to, like I think that I see a lot of what you're talking about in our generation. And it's just it's an overlapping spectrum. Like, isn't it really jarring when you meet someone who's your age or even maybe a bit older, but they speak exactly like a Gen Z? Do you know anyone like that? Because I know a few people like that where they just, obviously their lifestyle is quite different from you and I, but they speak, in all the classic buzzwords of a Gen Z, like they use, it's giving me X vibes. It's like, this is like, they use all the kind of lingo and stuff, and they're very like hyper kind of flashy with their social media use and all this kind of stuff. Like I always find that very jarring. I'm like, aren't you our age?
You mean you've got TikTok?
It's just like, or what they say, like something's fire. Like when is the acceptable age where you're too old to use that term?
Oh, what is this term? I'll show my age. What is it?
You haven't heard that when like Gen Zs go, this so and so dropped this track, it's fire.
No, I've never heard that. Obviously, I don't hang around the cool kids.
Yeah. It's probably like outdated, right? Because these things, like as soon as they're cool, they're not cool anymore. I did watch Old Dads on your recommendation.
Oh, how'd you like it?
Thoroughly enjoyed it.
It just was so true. It was almost too close.
It was too true. And like I do like how he mixed in like how to think that you're right but still fuck up your life entirely. I think that I really resonated with that, this idea of like he's just so real and it's true, he's only like destroying everything around him.